what I think I hear you saying is that if I had that resource there to help me as I'm navigating these unknowns, that would have helped you sleep a little bit better at night. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. Help me sleep, period. I was not sleeping, John, during that
Yeah.
period. I think it was about 8 months, but waking up at 3 AM in a cold sweat,
Yeah.
right? You're
That's the
you're
doom
we're
loop.
all familiar with it. That's
Yeah,
the do
sure.
bill. I was spiraling. I was like that fighter plane, like going down.
Good morning, Glenn. How are you?
Morning. Hey, John. How are you this morning?
I'm good. We're here for the third episode of our podcast,
Yep.
Understanding Escaping the CEO Doom Loop. And we're here today to talk a little bit about your journey, your path to getting to do what you do today and where it all started and what were the ups and downs and the things that you had to endure and learn and help to get to this point. So glad to be here with you today and talk about that a little bit. Any comments
Yeah,
that you'd like to
same.
start with before we jump in?
No, John, I'm looking forward to it. We started off just on the first podcast episode talking about why we're doing this. We
Yep.
talked a bit about the CEO playbook that we co-authored and the CEO doom loop, the concept that came out of that. And then we talked about your CEO journey on our next episode. And now we'll be talking about my CEO journey and how I got here and why I'm doing what I'm doing, which is being a CEO and leadership team coach. All right. Shoot. What
Cool.
questions do you have, John?
Well,
All
let's
right.
jump in. Let's go back and let's kind of talk about your journey professionally and kind of run us through kind of where it started and how you got to where you're at today.
I grew up outside Detroit in suburbs outside Detroit. And John, you and I share that in common. We grew up not too far from each other, actually.
Yeah,
And I barely graduated high school. I think I had a 1.7 GPA, if that's even possible.
that's
You
awesome.
know, the beauty of public schools.
Yeah,
And my father died when I was a senior in high school.
mm,
And
remember that.
among so many things, and during my childhood, I didn't have much direction. And I graduated high school and I ended up going to work on an assembly line. If you remember the Michigan truck plant, I was on Michigan Avenue,
Yeah, down in Wayne.
next door to it was next door to what used to be the Wayne Drive-In.
Yeah,
That
for
whole
sure.
facility has expanded now, a much larger plant. But yeah, I worked for a supplier, and my company made the fiberglass tops that went on 1979 Ford Broncos.
Oh wow.
And so that's where I started out my career working in the factory.
What was your takeaway work? Your biggest takeaway from working in a factory?
One of my biggest takeaways was that the thing most people look forward to was lunch hour when they
Mm,
could go get in their cars and run down to the liquor store and buy a fifth of vodka and a 2 liter of soda, mix those together and drink as much as they could before lunch was over and then went back in to work on Ford
oh
Broncos and pickup trucks.
wow.
Yeah, and I think looking back, one of the things is there wasn't a lot of purpose. I mean, the
Mm,
automobile industry, right? The Henry Ford and the assembly line, but basically many of the people working there were kind of just robots, and they just did those jobs, as you know, John. I mean, they were really well paying.
yeah.
They had really great benefits, and people who worked overtime. They made good money and allowed them to buy boats and cabins and snowmobiles and all those things,
Yeah.
so they could go up in northern Michigan and escape on the weekends. And that was one thing that it wasn't a life that appealed to me, and it's almost seemed like many of the people who worked there spent more time trying to not work than to
Mm,
do a good job. There wasn't any kind of motivation to do a better job. It's a very much a union environment, which unions have a great place in our history, right, for workers' rights. But at some point, in my observation, seeing there, it gets to a point of where everybody's paid the same pay grade, and it's really based on seniority. And so that made a big impact on me as it related to what I wanted to do, and I knew it wasn't that.
mm. So how did that shape kind of your next decisions of what you wanted to do?
I drifted, I did a couple jobs. One of the things I ended up doing is I ended up then getting a job with the Jeep Corporation, with actually what was then American Motors, was half owned
Sure.
by the French automaker Renault, and became a test driver with Jeep. And
Oh
I got
wow.
hired on as a temporary employee. Yeah. And then I ended up getting hired full time. Then I ended up getting promoted. And really that led to a point where I was actually promoted into several roles with American Motor Jeep. But I ended up getting passed over for a promotion, a significant promotion it was about 2006. And I was like 25, 26. That really led me to make the decision to quit my job at the automotive company, which a lot of people were perplexed about because it's a job for life,
Right.
with a pension and benefits. But
Yeah.
what I did is I ended up going to college full time and getting my bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan.
You were 25 or 26 when you made that decision.
Yes. Yeah, I was
Wow.
actually 27. Yeah, I made the
Wow.
decision, and then at 27 years old, I quit my job and all the
Wow.
trappings and everything, and I plunged myself back into college, sitting in classrooms with, 17, 18, 19-year-olds.
Takes a lot of courage to do that.
Yeah, yeah, but I was motivated, and that's
Mm.
something that's kind of all through my life has been willingness to take a change when I'm motivated to do that.
Take a chance, right?
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
right, getting ahead.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's cool. So you went to school at 27. How long were you in school? How long did it take for you to get through your program?
Yeah, actually 3 years. One of my good
Mm.
friends always observed, he said, "Well," he goes, "You were like you were on a mission." And I was, because I was paying for this myself, and this was my career age, not
Yeah.
my college age, and I ended up getting my bachelor's degree in 3 years and graduated with a pretty good GPA. I won't state it here because I'd probably inflate it, but I ended up going into a whole different industry. I got hired by a local company called Velasquez Communications that was then about a $400 million company. Ended up staying with that company for 19 years, doing a variety of assignments, several of them in Europe. The company, when I left, was about $2.4 billion. So I
Wow.
really learned a lot, did a lot of different assignments through that, and really came up through sales and marketing into sales leadership.
But you saw a lot of growth in your 20 years there, which was that all organic growth or some of it acquisition, or what was the mix of that?
Yeah, it was both. It was both
Was it?
organic and some new product launching, definitely some acquisition. Threw myself into a lot of change because I would go work for acquisitions. That ended up how I did a couple stints in Europe. I ended up moving my whole family to Germany for a year to do that as we were launching
Wow.
new products out of 5 different business units we had acquired in Europe, and really exciting stuff. And I just
Yeah, that's cool.
the learning, yeah, the learning, the real world learning and on the job training and learning about different work cultures and different regulatory environments and how consumers in different cultures, different countries viewed their purchasing experience, and getting to work with a variety of companies, some really great companies like Procter and Gamble and Nestle. It was invaluable what I learned there.
Oh, that's cool. So you did that for 20 years in a variety of different roles in a variety of different locations, right? It's pretty cool. If you think about kind of your biggest concepts or learnings that you kind of took from that that maybe you use today in your work with clients, would any perspective what those are?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I've reflected on this a lot, and I do use this. I think the first and foremost is the importance of culture,
Mm.
and that culture resides in people. And I remember coming back from my second stint in working in Europe, and we were on our second CEO who had come up through the company as well. But the company had gone from private to public
Mhm.
ownership, which changed a lot.
Yeah, it's
And
way
then
different.
the company, yeah, we had acquired a company that was actually just about our size with a lot more employees. And usually in an acquisition, there's an acquirer and then the company gets
Yeah.
acquired and they kind of get absorbed up into it. But because there were so many more people employed at this company, I think it may have been 2 to 3 times more people, but the culture lives in the people. And what ended up happening is that absorbing that many people radically changed the culture of the company that I had known and loved and worked for so many years, to the point of like that I really said consciously, I no longer want to work at this company. These are
Mm.
not the people that I'm proud to work with. These are not the people that I trust and know. And these are not the people that we share core values with. And they were great people, right? They had their values, they had their way of working, but it was just so different from what I felt was the best environment for me. I decided I wanted to leave that company. Number 2 is the concept of careful strategic planning and then really cascading that down through the whole company, which is one of the tenets of the metronomic system that you and I
Yeah.
use now, to
Yeah.
the point that we as a company would shut down for an entire day globally, and basically it would be planning from at the corporate level. The plans and priorities for the year would be released. Then they would go and we would meet as a division. We would talk about divisionally what were our goals and priorities that laddered up. We would meet as a department and decide as a department, how do we want to, what are our priorities that will help to add value to those priorities above us? And then individually, what could each and every person in that department do, personal priorities that would ladder up to department, to divisional, to corporate.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's obviously very similar to the framework that we use in metronomics, where we're trying to align those personal priorities within a role all the way to what's happening at the organizational level. So you had actually experienced that in your professional world before coming here or before doing this work.
Yes,
Yeah, it's cool.
absolutely. Yep.
So what happened after you decided that the culture was different and you wanted to go seek something else, something different? What was that? And where'd you go and why'd you decide to do that?
I was open to it, right? I was open to leaving. I turned down many offers before that, right? We all get headhunted in our corporate careers, but I ended up being at a happy hour with the CEO of a small company, a publicly traded company that my company had a relationship with that was based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, but ended up getting a conversation with him that I was asking him questions about his company and his succession planning and the business. And that conversation ended up into him offering me a job, offering me a role at his company as a VP of marketing with a path to the CEO role.
Oh,
And
wow.
as we talked, yeah, that CEO said, "Look, I'm looking to retire soon. I've been here in the CEO role, I think, for 20 years." And he said, "I'm ready to step back, and I think you could be the person to succeed me." And so I took the gamble. I went to the company, and it came true. There was a long journey in between that. Actually, the company, in the 2 years before I was promoted up to run the company, we lost our largest client, a third of the revenue. We had been in litigation with a very large competitor for 10 to 12 years that finally went to court. We were hoping for a very successful judgment in our favor. We ended up settling. It wasn't as successful as what we wanted. So the company was not in great shape at that point. And
Mm.
that was the point in time which I think the previous CEO was just hired. And the board of directors, I think they just want to try and get rid of the company or sell it. Stock was down. And I said, you know what? I think I can do this. And as I often say, you can't fall far when you're already on the floor. So I didn't have a lot to lose. I was only playing to win. And we stepped up and actually brought in my own team. And that was my next phase of my career.
So you ran marketing for a couple of years and you step up to be the CEO. The old CEO leaves at that point, and then you've got it day to day reporting to the chairman. Are you the chairman at that point, or what's that look like?
Yeah, great, really great question. I learned a lot about publicly traded companies. And I know, John, you and I work mostly with privately held companies. And it's a very complex, I mean, every ownership model is complicated, and every ownership model comes with its own challenges and advantages and disadvantages. But what happened is I was put into the role of running the company, and I didn't have any training or very little. And
Mm,
yes, there was a chairman of the board that I was reporting to. And at that point in time, I needed to turn the company around and just do a really good job of bringing the company back, really, because the company, we were losing significant operating losses every quarter. We had some cash in the bank, and that was quickly being bled out. So we needed to do some pretty drastic things.
wow. Was that exhilarating or scary, or what was your, as we talk about the CEO doom loop, right? The things you described, like I've been
Yeah.
in those
Yeah.
myself professionally and personally. And yeah, you got to, I don't know how I feel
Yeah.
about it. It's both of those things. So how did you feel about that
Right.
when you were in that situation yourself?
Yeah. I know you and I have talked a lot about this, and it was both scary and exhilarating.
Yeah.
And I think to a point, I didn't know what I didn't know in a sense. I think part of that was good because it just allowed me to focus on the number one, which was let's save the company. That worked out really well until it didn't.
What's that mean?
Well, it was a really simple strategy. Our strategic focus is to stay in business. I remember the CFO that we had came into my office. He said, "Glenn, I have a call with an investor this afternoon, and he wants to know what your strategic plan is." And I'm like, huh, oh. And he said, "Can you do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can do that." And he left. I'm like, can you close the door to behind you?" And I was like, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I don't know.
Get my napkin out my
But it
crayon,
makes
huh?
it was pretty much that, John. I took out a blank sheet of
Yeah.
paper, and I remember I wrote 3 bullet points, and I don't remember exactly what they were, but it was pretty simple. It was just something about we needed to increase sales. So it was all about focusing on our customers. We had to
Mm,
focus on our customers. Because my opinion, coming in from the outside, was that during that whole lawsuit period, the company had lost its focus. The focus became, and really the business plan was win the lawsuit.
yeah.
And I think everybody took their eye off the ball of running the business. So
Yeah.
I was like, that's over, done with. let's focus on running the business. So it was really, let's focus on our customers, let's support our sales team, and let's cut everything that doesn't support one and two. And that's what we did. And we basically said the name of the company was called Insignia Systems. And we kind of came up with this rallying cry to say, well, this is Insignia 2.0. We're reinventing the company.
Yeah.
And we did. We were successful. Within about 18 months, we had turned the company around. We were profitable and we built it back up. We had good cash, very healthy cash reserves. We had strong EBITDA, strong cash flow, great balance sheet. And during that point in time, I did experience the CEO doom loop, but a lot of it was because I was only playing to win. I didn't have a lot to lose. And so I wasn't even focused as much on the downside. I was really just focused on the upside and how do we get there.
Mm. It's interesting. So you could take off some of the doom loops stuff because of kind of where you went in, where you're at in your career, and really what your vision or goal was for turning the company around. So how long were you in the CEO seat doing this until, I think, what was the quote you used? It worked until it didn't, right? I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
How long did that
Yeah.
that take?
I think probably let's call it, it's probably 3 years. And what really happened in that last year, I mean, we were successful, but what ended up happening is I knew that we needed a next level strategy. Basically brought the company back to from company at its best had been about 30 million, maybe a little shy of that. And when I took it over, we were at 16, 17 million, but still the
Wow.
same size company, employee count. So yeah, we had to do a lot of
Mm,
cutting, but also getting things back. And we ended up getting it back up to almost 30 million.
okay.
So, and the interesting thing is that we had to do a significant staff cut at first. And as we grew, we actually didn't add that many people back in.
Yeah.
We gained in efficiencies. We made some investments in equipment and we gained in efficiencies, which allowed us then to be more profitable. That was a good lesson for me that we were able to do that. And what ended up happening is we were a publicly traded company. We ended up becoming very successful financially. But as a CEO, I was still running the company. I was trying to come up with a next level strategy. And John, I didn't even know what strategy meant. I really didn't and probably needed some stronger individuals on my leadership team that could help with the next level strategy.
Yeah.
I was the dumbest guy in the room because I thought I had to be the smartest guy in the room. So I thought it was all on my shoulders and I couldn't come up with the next level, the next strategy. I couldn't communicate it. I couldn't rally the troops around it the way I had when our mission was very simple of we have to save the company.
Mm,
Like
it's
I
interesting.
was able to get a lot of enthusiasm around that because and it was a simple message and I communicated it. I think I did really well because it worked but it was that next level where I faltered, and what ended up happening is there was a holding company that what they did is they bought publicly traded companies like ours that were very profitable, but very thinly traded. They didn't have a whole lot of stock activity
Yeah.
around them, and, basically, they ended up buying 20% of the shares of our company and ended up taking control of the board, and 8
Ah,
months later, I was gone. One of the things I think in retrospect, as I talked about the save the company, that was all about that was playing to win. But I think what happened is I started switching my thinking into I was playing not to lose
yeah.
because we were there and we were kind of stalled. We were kind of at that plateau. Like, how do we get to the next level? And I was looking at acquisitions and new products and how do we do it? But it was just like, I don't know, how do I make a decision? How do I come up with this strategy? How do I do all these things? And in that interim, that allowed this other entity to come in and say, wow, you guys, your balance sheet looks great. I think we're going to take you over and just run it for cash.
So you're there for 3 or 4 years, take over as CEO, turn the company around, go through the whole majority of the board being managed by outside resources that weren't part of what you kind of signed up for. So you do that, and then you're okay. What do I do next? When you get through that process, what do I do next? Kind of thought process for you.
You mean after I left the company?
Yeah, right.
I was wounded. I had put so much of my heart and soul and unfortunately my ego
Mm,
as CEO of that company that my ego was tied to that success. And I didn't know what to do next. And I was embarrassed, I was shamed because of what had happened. And I was really depressed because I loved that company and we had a great team. And I felt like I had failed in my mission for the company and our shareholders. I had a lot of backwards thinking about, well, what could I have done? How could I have played this better? But I know had I had a coach, someone I could trust, I would have fared a whole lot better.
yeah. Well, I'm sure it would at least who knows what would happen with the majority of the board control occurring, that some of that stuff gets outside your control, but I think what I hear you saying is that kind of that day to day, like, hey, I'm in a spot where I don't have all the answers and I need some help. I need somebody that I could trust, that I can have hard conversations with about what's working,
Mhm.
what's not working. What I think I hear you saying is that if I had that resource there to help me as I'm navigating these unknowns, that would have helped you sleep a little bit better at night. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Help me sleep period. I was not sleeping, John, during that
Yeah.
period. I think it was about 8 months, but waking up at 3 AM in a cold sweat,
Yeah.
right? You're
That's the
you're
doom
we're
loop.
all familiar with it. That's
Yeah,
the
it's
do bill.
terrible.
I was spiraling. I was like that fighter plane, like going down. But after I got clear of that and had some time, I actually had some people calling me, and I was meet and talk with people, and had some job offers, and just nothing really felt right. But what ended up happening is some business owners ended up started talking to people in businesses and just got in conversation like, "Hey, how's your business?" And they would start talking to me about some of the issues they were experiencing. And I would start talking to them about, well, what about this and what about that? And then I still remember a couple people, I'm like, "Hey, why don't we meet up on Saturday? I'll come over and we'll whiteboard out some stuff."
Mm,
And basically what I was doing, John, I was coaching. I was helping them do strategic planning. And I still remember my wife saying, like, "Why are you giving this away?" I'm like, "Well, I love doing this. This is great." But it started working. Like the people that I was helping, they were starting to see success.
mm,
So based on that, I decided, well, why don't I become what I thought then was a management consultant? I was going down that path. I was actually going to go to work for a management consultancy, a small boutique firm. And the CEO of that firm said, "Glenn, you don't want to work for me. You don't want to work for anybody. You're a CEO." He goes, "You should become a CEO coach." He actually said, he goes, "I would hire you today on the spot, but I already have a really good CEO coach. I'm going to introduce you to him."
mm.
And so he introduced me to his coach, who was a scaling up coach, and the rest is history. That was 7 years ago. And the conversation with that CEO actually took place in Scottsdale, just a couple miles from where we had our retreat back in February.
Yeah, that's cool. It's funny that because my entry into coaching is pretty similar. I wasn't thinking about being a coach until my coach said, "Have you ever thought about being a coach?" And I was like, "You should think about it." And here I am 8 years later. It's the same conversation you just had where somebody's connected the
Isn't that
dots
funny?
for you. Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like I wasn't even
Yeah.
thinking about it. It wasn't anything in my purview. And here I am. And it's crazy.
Yeah, and I had talked to the EOS organization about becoming, because we had used EOS in our companies, and what I saw when I read the book Scaling Up by Vern Harnish, and it opened up a whole new world for me, because going back to my time and my stint as a CEO using EOS, EOS is a executional model for entrepreneurial companies.
Yeah.
And yes, we needed that execution and we still hadn't mastered it, but what I needed was strategy.
Mm,
And what I needed was a coach in my corner, someone I could trust to help guide me through those conversations, just someone I could talk to.
yeah.
I didn't have that, so I was talking to the people reporting to me.
Yeah.
I was talking to board members, I was talking to investors, but I couldn't really fully trust any of those people with the issues, especially those doom loop issues that were going on inside my head.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So you get into the coaching world. And one of the questions I'd like to ask you, and I've been asking all my clients this, if you think about kind of your life's purpose, what do you
Mhm.
think it is?
Yeah, good question, John. It is to go back and be the coach and mentor to Glenn as a CEO. And I can't do that, but what I can do is to help other frustrated and lonely CEOs, to help them get clarity on their strategic path. What is
Mm,
their purpose? And how can they lead their team there? That's why I do what I do.
that's interesting. So what you do every day today with really what your personal journey was and that doom loop and that despair that we go through, that everybody goes through when there's just unbelievable uncertainty. So you really feel
Yeah.
like your life's purpose today is connected with the work that you do with the clients that you work with on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you this, I've been now coaching for 7 years,
Mm.
and this is the longest I've ever had a single role in my entire life.
That's fascinating. I get exactly what you're saying. Why do you find it so fulfilling and rewarding to be a coach?
Yeah, I think because it relies a lot on the experience I've had, and the experiences probably more the mistakes than the successes I've
Yeah.
had, right? Because those are really what learns, but there's also success that comes from learning what not to do. So being able to see that, the CEOs, to help them envision, to be their coach and their guide, and it's really to be turning from being the hero, which I was probably what I envisioned myself as a CEO, into the guide. I find the work that we do incredibly rewarding because it's not just, oh, I'm helping a CEO, but it's helping CEOs and owners build better companies and grow better companies. So you think how that can impact every single person in their company. If they enjoy their jobs more and that they're more purposeful, what does that mean then when they go home at night to their families? And if they're able to make better products and services for their customers, how much better is those the customers' lives? And then if there's financial stakeholders in the company, how much better is an investment in that company and how much more profitable it's going to be because it's much more efficient, as you and I
Yeah.
know, right? We focus on cash. And so I find that incredibly rewarding. And it's not just from a perspective of like, oh, I'm helping make some owner rich. I'm helping make a lot of people rich in many ways. That's how I see it.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. I think that the making owners rich thing, I think that's why people are in business, but that's ultimately not what great companies are about. They make money because they're great at the things that they do and they create a great culture. But kind of what I hear you saying is that you kind of feel like through your coaching practice that you're hoping to make the world a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. I know,
Yeah.
and it sounds kind of fun to say that, but I really do feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, but if you look at the companies you work with and they have 30, 40, 50, couple hundred people and whatever it is, and you can go in and help them kind of settle things down and get a focus for
Mhm.
what the future looks like and create a consistent culture. And I know we're aligned around that 100%. And when people, I think what you said is really interesting that when people go home at the end of the night, they can feel like they made a contribution, not just because it's a job, but because they can see their impact on the greater organization. I don't know if it's corny, Glenn. I think it's super impactful, and I think that's in the end what it's all about, don't you?
I do. One of the most rewarding moments, I don't know if it's the most, but when my wife and I went out to dinner with one of my client CEOs, with he and his wife, and we sat down, and early in the conversation, his wife leaned over and said, "I've been really been looking forward to meeting you, Glenn, because ever since my husband started working with you, he comes home from work much more relaxed. So
Mm.
thank you."
That's awesome. So you're impacting people. I think in the end, that's what it's about, right? So that when people we're working with, both the SEALs and the leadership team, they go home, they're better members of their family and better leaders to the people they work with and they lead. And I think that's what coaching's all about.
Yeah, exactly.
So what else? What other things are takeaways from you've got a very diverse, rich work history from working on a manufacturing line to being a CEO of a company and now a coach. When you boil it all down, what's it all about? What are the most important things as you look at organizations as they want to grow and thrive and create consistency? What are the most important things that you think are important for organizations to be thoughtful about in that journey?
Well, Jim Collins says it before what? Who?
Yeah.
It's having the right people. And that's certainly most important. Having a plan, having a strategic plan. I'm not going to say the right plan, but having a plan and communicating that plan and then being able to execute on that plan. And you can't execute on that plan unless you have the right people. And you can't execute unless you have a good strategic plan. I mean, you can execute, but kind of in that getting the right seats on the bus, you're just driving the bus around the block unless you really have a direction. And I boil it down this way when I'm trying to tell people what we do. I said, what we do is we make sure that every company knows where they're going, why they're going there, how they're going to get there, and what everybody in the company needs to do to ensure they get there.
Yeah.
And I find that using our metronomics process that we both use, when we do that well, that is exactly what happens.
Yeah. Lot to do on that, but I agree with you. Those are really kind of the 4 focus areas of our work that help organizations get to where they want to get to and create aligned, cohesive organizations.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, thanks
awesome.
for,
Thanks for your time, and I look forward to continuing our next iteration of podcasts we have lined up over the next couple months. It's good stuff.
yeah. Our next guest that we're going to have on our next episode is Casey Profita, who is the CEO of Gopher Mods. And we're going to learn all about what Gopher Mods does, where their name came from, because that's an interesting story. Casey's experience as a founder, owner, entrepreneur, and CEO. And we'll hear all about his journey and if he's ever experienced the CEO doom loop.
I look forward to it. See you soon.
Yeah. All right, John. Time.
Bye bye.